Missiles. Not this. While there are many different types of them, they can be easily classified into 3 categories, known as FOX. Fox 1 is aircraft radar guided, Fox 2s track IR signatures, and 3s have their own semi-active radar within the missiles themselves. Today, myself and special guest Nimbal will be explaining how to evade missiles in War Thunder. Now, while we might be a set of War Thunder Sim content creators, I guarantee you this information will be applicable to all of War Thunder. Alright, back to the missiles. Despite the numbering, we actually see Fox 2s first in War Thunder's tech tree. These are typically AIM-9Bs or others of the sort, and while they are great against bombers or bots, any competent player simply needs airspeed and eyesight to react, meaning your boomstick was just dead weight for nothing. One of the reasons for this is that IR seekers love it hot, and they don't have the best depth perception, so they'll typically beeline it for the giant ball of gas a few million miles away. Early missiles have poor maneuverability and limited scopes, so once you leave its sight, that thing is not tracking. They're also strictly rear aspects, so as long as you're checking your 6, as you should be doing anyway, you should see this thing coming and be able to react to it. Now, by the time you actually get to top tier, everything I just said is not applicable anymore. Missiles can be anywhere at any time due to the invention of all aspect, high off-bore sight, and smokeless missiles, meaning we've got to change tactics. And in this department, countermeasures will be your best friend. More specifically, flares. They're like dozens of little hot suns being thrown about, and when combined with decreased throttle percentage to reduce your aircraft's heat signature, can work wonders, especially up to 12.0. With later BRs, you'll have to be a bit more crafty and involve pre-flaring. Pre-flaring combats the idea that if the missiles will almost certainly hit their target, then we can throw off what they actually target by deploying flares before the missiles even fire. Now, this does require you to have some pretty good timing and honestly a bit of luck, as reaching the merge with modern tech and missiles is as much of a coin toss as it is terrifying. But training, what if I don't have countermeasures? Well, lucky for you, I'm crazy enough to know. If you see my last video where I flew this 9.0 jet without any radar, warning receivers, or countermeasures, then you'll know a fraction of the pain I've suffered to learn these lessons. But what wasn't included in that video was 4 hours of footage strictly evading missiles. And I can inform you that there are 3 keys to evading high-tier IR missiles, even without countermeasures. Now let's go in order. They are outrange, outpull, and min-range. Now I say order because at these tiers you will have to do all 3, that's 2, all 3 to successfully win a dogfight with only guns. And of course, you're starting from further out. So to outrange, which will be the first thing you're doing, it is helpful to know the missiles that you're fighting against and to then approximate the range at which they were launched against you. Outrange is another way of saying running away, or creating separation, a tactical retreat, if you will, from the launching aircraft that will require the missiles to burn up its fuel before it even reaches you, either letting you outspeed the stick or to then outmaneuver it once its rocket engine has burned through all of its fuel. For non-smokeless missiles, it's actually pretty easy to tell when the missile runs out of fuel because the distinct white trail will no longer exist. Just know that the stick will be carrying a good bit of momentum, but that it's no longer accelerating. Being above the launching aircraft will also help deplete its energy once the missile has used up its fuel, and vice versa if you're lower. It might actually still be accelerating in that case due to gravity. And that brings us to the second point, outpull. While this is easier with missiles such as the AIM-9B, it is still an option later on. Outpulling works best when the missile that is being fired has achieved its maximum speed. At this point, the stick is committed to a relatively straight line and will have less time to make adjustments to your jerk movements. And your goal is either going to be to make it overshoot or to make it hit the deck. Approaching the attacking aircraft at a side or slight forward angle will help you achieve this. Once you see the missiles reach its peak speed, make a hard turn into the direction of the attacking aircraft to maximize your angles in this situation. If you're at higher altitudes, pulling down for this will be ideal because the missile will continue to gain airspeed when it's heading towards the deck, making it more difficult to slow down to react to your maneuvers. But you gotta be careful. Doing this too early in the launch cycle will get you a quick bill and teleport back to base. Make sure that thing has got some ass behind it before you maneuver. Another aspect of outpulling is utilizing the ground. If you're at low altitudes and the missile is heading your way, you can mimic the downwards movements that you would do at higher altitudes, but just for a short period of time. This will hopefully make the missile overcommit towards the earth below, like a windshield wiper on a splatted bug. And interestingly, this technique may actually work better when it's utilized earlier in the launch cycle, as that is when the missile is going to make its more drastic movements. But whether it will work will depend a lot on the launching aircraft's altitude. And finally, we have the simplest of all of them, min-ranging, or minimum ranging. This is simply sitting inside the missile's own turn radius. Now, of course, the effectiveness of this will depend a lot on the missiles being used, but a good rule of thumb is that the closer you are, the better you are to the enemy aircraft. IRs. But really the best way to evade IR missiles is to combine all of the techniques I've just spoken about and to use countermeasures and flares alongside these techniques. Or you can use my personal favorite technique, the substitute. I'm not even really joking. The closer you are to an enemy aircraft, the less confident that another enemy aircraft is going to be in knowing that their lock is actually on you and not their own teammate. That should deter them from firing. Should is pretty important in that. I'm not a lawyer, don't take my advice. Now that we've covered IR missiles and Fox 2s, let's get into some radar stuff. Over to you, Nimbal.
Alright, I'm Nimbal. I do sim videos and stuff on my channel, mainly focusing on top tier, but every now and then I do dabble in some of the lower tiers a little bit as well. Now, I was kindly invited here to try and explain to you how to deal with some of these new radar-guided missiles that have been terrorizing the airspace for the last couple of months. Now, there are three main ways how you can defeat radar-guided missiles. The first one is kinetically. This means you either run away and outrange the missile, or you simply outmaneuver it or something like that. The second is by multipathing, where if you fly low enough to the ground, the missile actually starts to target the ground instead of your plane, but I'll get more into that in a little bit. And the third way is by decoying the missile. So this is proper use of chaff, and yes, I will be talking about notching in this one. Now, turning around and running away and simply outranging the missile is by far the safest way to deal with these. However, if you don't have a missile of your own to fire back at the opponent will most likely just keep following you, keep pushing you, keep firing missiles at you. And if you're on a flat map like Denmark or Sinai or something like that, and you don't have any terrain to sort of hide behind and turn around, in a lot of cases you are just sort of delaying the inevitable. Eventually he's either going to get you, or you're going to have to turn around and sort of face the music. If you're on maps like Afghanistan, Vietnam that actually have a bit of terrain, you can use this to your advantage, where you find a mountain or something, duck behind it, break line of sight. You might even confuse them a little bit, but it gives you a little bit of cover to sort of turn around and get into an offensive position again. Also, if you're fighting an F-14 or a Mirage 2000C, both of these planes have radars that really struggle to target you if you're flying away from them close to the ground. So if you want to stay stealthy against these planes, that's how you do it. Now, how can you be sure that if you turn around now, the missile that is currently flying at you isn't going to catch you? This is what's known as the no escape zone, and it's basically what it says on the tin. If you're within this zone, then it means that no matter what you do, you can do a complete 180 full afterburner, the missile is going to catch you no matter what. Now, strictly speaking, you can calculate the no escape zone for every single engagement, but obviously when you're flying, you're not going to be able to do this. So a lot of it is basically you take like a rough estimate and then you just sort of guess the rest. The thing is, there are so many different variables that go into something like this. It takes into account altitude, speed of your aircraft, speed of the enemy aircraft that it was at when it launched a missile at you, and also the angle that you're at to, in relation to your opponent. If you're going to be pointing directly at them, obviously it's going to take a lot longer for you to sort of turn around and do a 180 than if you're already halfway pointing away from them, right? This is also what's known as the minimum abort range, by the way. It takes into account how long it's going to take for you to turn around, but that's just a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm, the skit I'm trying to make here. So I wouldn't think about this too hard though, because eventually you are just going to develop like a feeling for this kind of thing, at what ranges you can sort of do what at and stuff like that. The reference that I use is that the AMRAAM at sea level, if both planes are, roughly flying Mach 1, the AMRAAM has a no escape zone of about 12-ish kilometers, right? And I'll just go from there. Now, another way that you can counter these types of missiles is by multipathing. Now, this has been a hot topic in the community for the last couple of months, and it's essentially if you fly below 60 meters above the ground, radar missiles are actually going to start targeting the ground instead of your plane. Now, this is actually a real thing that happens in real life. However, in War Thunder, it is greatly exaggerated just for balancing purposes and stuff like that. Now, you could do this really well on maps like Denmark, Sinai, Dover Strait, basically any map with a lot of water on it, or just very flat terrain, where it's very easy to stay a certain height above the ground and you don't really have to do too much. Maps with a lot of trees can also get kind of tricky sometimes, depending on how high the trees are. I'm looking at you, Rocky Canyon. Now, the problem here is that this becomes quite unreliable on maps that do actually have a lot of terrain, like Vietnam, Spain, Afghanistan. That's pretty much it, actually, if you don't want to play 4th gen fighters on a tiny Tunisia-sized map in Sim. Now, these maps are great because lots of terrain actually leads to a lot of interesting tactical decisions and stuff that you make, instead of just, so I see something on radar 50 kilometers away and then you just beeline it for that, right? Now, especially on something like Spain, for instance, there's a lot of micro terrain that undulates quite violently, and it can be very difficult to actually follow this terrain tightly, especially if you have a little bit of speed going in something like a 4th gen fighter, right? So if you're over this kind of rocky undulating terrain, I would highly recommend that you don't rely on multipathing. Try and go for the next thing, which I'm going to suggest, and that's decoying the missile. So in order for me to explain how chaff works, you have to have a basic understanding of how pulse Doppler radar works and what notching is. Now, most of you probably already know this, but for the ones that don't, I'm just going to go over it real quick. It's not that complicated. Pulse Doppler radar is basically just a way for the radar to tell how fast an object is going, right? Radar waves can contract in different ways depending on the speed and the angle of the object that it bounces. Yeah, like boring, nobody cares, right? What this means is that the radar can basically tell if an object is coming towards it or going away from it relative to the ground, of course. Now, this is really good because if you're trying to track a low-flying aircraft and you point your radar down anywhere near towards the ground, all of those radar waves are going to start bouncing off of every single building, tree, blade of grass, and the actual ground itself, get fed back into your radar antenna, and your radar's just going to be overwhelmed because there's so many goddamn things actually happening on your screen, and it's not going to be able to identify the actual aircraft that you're looking for. So if you tell the radar to only focus on those radar returns that are coming off of things that are either getting closer or further away from you relative to the ground, then the picture becomes a whole lot more clearer and you can actually see the aircraft that you're looking for. So what happens if the target aircraft is flying at a perfect 90-degree angle to you? This means that it's not going to get any closer to you or any further away from you, at least not any faster than the ground is. This means that the actual speed filtering on the pulse Doppler radar is going to recognize that enemy aircraft contact as a stationary target, which means it's going to ignore it and hence it's not going to show up on the radar screen. This is what's known as notching, and it's actually really effective in War Thunder, at least against active radar guided homing missiles. I have a clip here where you can see that the opponent fired an AMRAAM at me, and I don't deploy any chaff or anything like that, but I simply just turn around, and as I'm passing through the notch, so passing through the 90-degree angle, the radar briefly loses track, and it just kind of, because it has like the weird IOG system where it predicts where you're going to be, it just kind of keeps on going in the direction it thinks I'm going, but obviously I'm going to keep turning around, and it actually just ends up losing me. So I completely dodged the tracking system on this missile without even using any chaff, simply just by turning around. Now, at the moment, notching does seem to be very, very effective in this game. However, radar notch gates, that is, the different speed gates at which the pulse Doppler starts recognizing objects, doesn't get tweaked like all the time, but it gets tweaked enough that you can expect a couple of changes within a patch cycle. So depending on when you watch this video, this might be more or less effective. You're just going to have to try it out for yourself. To give yourself the best chances of survival though, you're going to want to combine this with chaff. Now, chaff should technically, if we take real life as an example, only really be used as a substitute for ground clutter. So if you're high up in the sky and there's no ground to be seen, you deploy a bunch of chaff, and it basically forces the radar to re-engage its speed filtering because now there's a bunch of clutter on the screen, right, allowing you to notch. Now, the way it works in War Thunder is it's a little bit dumbed down. Radar missiles will actually lock onto chaff, providing that the target that deploys it is actually in the notch. So if you're just flying head-on towards a missile and you deploy a bunch of chaff, it's not going to work, right? You actually have to be notching. But again, it just kind of increases your survival chances. It increases the chances of the missile not hitting you, and also if it does lock onto the chaff and you are in the notch, it means that you can then also turn back into your opponent a lot sooner than you would be able to if you were just simply notching without it. Anyway, I hope I could clear up some stuff for you there. I hope it helps. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for Training Days for letting me anywhere near his channel.
And thank you, Nimbal, for coming on here and explaining a pretty complicated topic. I know I was existing in a dictionary at least twice during that video just to try to figure out what some of the terminology is. That is not my area of expertise, and I don't know if any of you guys have tried to explain all of that in an 8-minute consolidated video. It is not easy. So huge props to him for that. And of course, thank you for coming on here and agreeing to do it. Guys, I don't normally say stuff like this, but if you're still here watching, I'm making it a requirement to go check out his channel, okay? He does mostly top-tier sim, a lot of jet gameplay. He's sort of on the cutting edge of what is considered the simulator community's voice to developers as of recently. And his sub count is like criminally underrated. I don't even know how this is possible. So please go show him some love. I know as for me, this has kind of completed my recent series at top tier or with jets and War Thunder sim. And I'm actually going to go back to experiencing some of my props, the propeller planes are beckoning for me. We're gonna be turning to some fly till I dies. We're gonna be teaching another complete noob how to fly in War Thunder Sim, and we're gonna be doing some more viewer submissions react videos. So if you guys are up for that type of content, stick around here. That's what's coming next, and we will be exploring top tier at another point. So thank you all very much for watching. Again, please go check out Nimbal if y'all are still here. And best of luck evading all those missiles, fellas. Have a good one. Adios.